All right. A wonderful Monday. We got myself here, Coach D, as always, talking to you about the latest, greatest things in coaching and sports and how to get better. And we have a fantastic guest today, Coach Leech, head strength conditioning coach at University of Rhode Island. Go Rhody. So really, coach's first of all, his background he played football at Springfield College. He was a captain there. He was an all-district honoree as far as all academic. He was a fantastic football player there, but he focused on exercise and sports studies, exercise science, sports studies, which is in sports performance, which is a big deal at Springfield, along with I think physical education is one of the big other ones. But he went on. He was at Merrimack. He was with Springfield College, and he really built his career at Merrimack there. And now is at Rhode Island. Been there, and since 2020, I believe, and really has improved the program tremendously. Basketball obviously is one of the premier programs, but he works with all areas. Track and field, soccer, volleyball, baseball, football, women's tennis, you name it. And he's one of the foremost guys in this space and in charge of strength and conditioning for Rhode Island. So it's great to have you on, Coach.
I appreciate you having me.
Coach, go and if I missed anything, so I'm going to let you kind of dive in your athletic career, how you got into strength and conditioning, why you got into strength and conditioning, and it kind of like the rise of your career, some of the things you learned there.
Yeah, so, I kind of figured out early on, this is back in high school, that, I enjoyed exercise, I enjoyed fitness. My junior year of high school, I weighed 285 pounds. And I woke up one day and said, I just don't want to be the fat, funny kid anymore. I still want to be funny, but I don't want to be fat. And, so my senior year, I played football, but after football season, I wrestled as well. I dropped all the way down to 215 pounds. So in high school, I lost 70 pounds at one point. And it's funny, I went on a recruiting visit here to URI, and they were like, yeah, if you get back to like 280, 290, you might have. So I was like, all right, I can't do that. I was like, where can I play football and not be 500 pounds? And Springfield College, and I didn't even know it at the time, but Springfield College obviously is a D3 and primarily triple option. Yep. They've been doing it for freaking too long now. So if you go against a triple option team, you probably have a Springfield coach that's coaching it. And, they were like, hey, no, you're good. You can play at 230. You can play at 240.
That's what they want up there.
I think the heaviest I ever played at was like 260, and I actually was better, a little bit lighter at like 250. I played 2 years at guard and then 2 years at center, and absolutely loved it. My sophomore year, we rushed for 400 yards a game, which was D1, D2, D3. Nobody ran for more yards than us. So that's
what year was that?
That was 2012, I think. 2011, 2012.
I played him in 2000. I played against Chris Sharp.
Okay, yeah. So he cooked you. Okay.
Only 1 year.
Oh, man.
No, yeah, I went to Montclair State, so I know that we played Springfield two of my 3 years that I was there. So extremely familiar with the program itself.
And, you go there, and what you find out is if you want to be a football coach, if you want to be a strength coach, or if you want to be a PE teacher, you go to Springfield College. So, all my strength coaches that I had, because every year you get a different one because they graduate and they move on. They all were at D1 places, Power 5 programs. And I'm seeing that on a year-to-year basis and going, that's what I want to do. That's what I want to be. A lot of credit to football coaches. I can't do the recruiting side of things. I can't do some of that. So I was like, I'm going to stick to the strength stuff because you know what? I'm an undersized overachiever, and that's where we do best. We do best in the weight room because you can make a difference in the weight room. You can change somebody, not just make them a better football player or make them a better athlete, but the life lessons and things like that you can pull out of the weight room. I always appreciated that stuff. So I decided early on that's what I wanted to do. I did some internships along the way. Brown University, I went out to the University of Missouri for a summer, then some other places as well, and then got my first job out of grad school. I played, and then I did my GA at Springfield, so I worked with the football team there, and then went to Merrimack College, spent 5 years there. We were a D2 program, and then we transitioned up to Division I, so that was kind of cool seeing D2 athletes. And then when we went D1, the recruiting started to change real quick, and it was like, oh, okay, we're starting to get better guys. And then in 2020, there was a job open here at URI. I'm from Rhode Island, born and raised. My childhood home is 25 minutes up the road. And I was like, this is a chance to come home. This is amazing. Why would I got to take it. And it worked out perfectly for me at the time because I got here in January of 2020. And then obviously COVID hit and all that. And I was already at my mom's house looking for an apartment. So it's like, Mom, I'm just going to stay at the house for a little bit longer. So,
yeah.
And, the head guy left the following year. They promoted me up to the head. They think I'm doing a great job here. So they promoted me up to an associate AD role, a little bit more responsibility, a little bit more a seat at the table, which is something I've been asking for a while. And if you know anything about URI football, we haven't been good in a long time. Last time we won a conference championship was 1985. So almost 40 years we've been banging on the door. And, there's a lot of places in New England, and you don't really associate Rhode Island football with studs, and it's been a long time coming. And we've had a lot of tough years, but the kids keep coming. We keep trying to just do a little bit better. We get a little bit more support. Yeah, people hear about us as basketball first and foremost because we're in the Atlantic 10, which is a mid-major conference for basketball. Mm-hmm. But, we've just been chipping away, trying to do the right thing day in and day out and continue to instill that culture. We use the phrase 3 more feet, right? You just keep digging. You ever see that picture of the guy who turns, they're digging for diamonds and one guy turns around early and then the other guy digs 3 more feet and he hits the jackpot. So You don't know where that 3 more feet is, but you got to keep doing the right things. You got to keep going and going. And, this past year it finally paid off for us. And we won our first conference championship in 39 years, won our first 1AA playoff game in 39 years. Lost in the second round. I wish we could have got that one back. I think we could have done some things differently. So it's fun to be a part of that process. It's fun to be a part of that culture, especially as somebody who grew up watching URI football. Right. Somebody who came down to the games as a kid, someone who did summer camps here. And, I know the reputation and I've been a part of that. So to be able to be a part of the change is really cool. And now that we got the train rolling, it's a little bit easier to keep that thing going. It's a little bit better in the recruiting stuff and just the support feels so much better too. So we're in a good spot right now. We're doing good things.
Well, yeah, no, that's a great. I remember playing against Rhode Island back. Actually, when I played against them this is going back to 1995, I think they beat us, which kept us from being the conference champs. We were 8-3. They had some really good players that year, but for most of the time, I remember most of the time, other than that year, they for the most part struggled. And I've seen kind of how Rhode Island has started to improve, and from a football standpoint. And
I think New England football as a whole is on the up and up.
What do you think is contributing to that?
I think a huge thing for us is a lot of it is the trickle down effect of the NIL and the transfer portal stuff, especially the ability to play right away. So when it first happened, we kind of like we didn't know where we wanted to be, what we wanted to do. But I think our identity now is twofold. We get kids from the top down who haven't played or haven't had as much shine. They've been a backup for a couple of years at a Power 5 school, and they want an opportunity to be the big dog. So they come down here, and we'll give you the snaps, we'll give you the reps. You can be a big dog here and maybe put your 1 year on tape that you need. The other way around, maybe we go get the best kid in Division II and give him 1 year here where he can prove himself against better competition. So we're getting both. And then the high school kids, it's interesting. Like we get some good project guys and develop them. And then the hard part for us is don't lose them, right? Try and keep them here. But if we develop them and they do a great job and there are bigger and better opportunities, if we can't match it, we got to be okay with that and just let it go. Example, we recruited an offensive lineman out of Harlem, New York, played for us for 2 years, was a starter, phenomenal, went to Oregon. How are we going to compete against Oregon? You know what I mean? And then he redshirted, spent 2 years as the right tackle at Oregon, and he's going to be a draft pick this year. So can we be mad about that? I wish we could have kept him, but
right.
And the reality is, but the fact that we are developing and recruiting kids to take them to another level, whether it's the NFL or Power 5, that's a recruiting piece for us. Say, hey, you come here, we're going to get you ready for whatever the next level. Now, we hope you don't leave. We hope you stay. But, I get it. So I think for us, that's why we've been a little more successful. But I think that's happening across all of New England.
And are you talking about all of New England as far as college-wise that it's improving?
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Even the higher level, I think Syracuse is on the rise.
Yeah,
right?
of course.
Boston College now with Bill O'Brien, I think is going to be on the up and up. And UMass with Coach Harris-Simiak, I think is going to give them a couple years. I think they're going to turn into a good program. UConn's always been doing their thing. So even the higher level above us, but New England, we've always had, the CAA's got a bunch of teams up north here where it's Maine, it's New Hampshire, Albany, Stony Brook had a great year this year. There's a lot of tough teams up here in New England.
Yeah. Well, I think that's as people with NIL start to figure out places where they can get opportunities, because when the CAA expanded and like some of the teams went to Division I, like UConn and UMass, you already always had Boston College. But before that happened, though, that like Yankee Conference was like a powerhouse conference, and it was primarily New England, right? And there was kind of like a big pride in that. And then when some of the teams went to Division I, the CAA expanded down south initially. That changed, I think, a lot of the pride of those New England programs in the FCS level, because of different things you had to keep up with resource wise. But I think it's really been good because JMU now moving on, and some of a couple other programs have moved on to Division I.
Delaware.
Delaware's on the move.
Delaware. Yep. It gives the schools like Rhode Island an opportunity, if they continue to improve like they're doing, to really
even at the lower levels. I'm proud of Springfield College this year.
Yep.
Made a D3 playoff run, right? So that's another. And then Endicott over, I believe, New
York,
right?
Yeah.
Or Connecticut,
now,
maybe.
Coach, I have a question.
Went down to Texas and started beating some D3 teams in Texas. So
do you think this? Go ahead, Coach. Go ahead.
There's good football at every level in New England.
Right.
Absolutely. And there's a million Division III programs that are a high level, and we're, you know what I mean? Do you think, Coach, that the lack of maybe Power 4 or big time, right, teams in the Northeast benefits the URIs of the world, the Maines, because you have, you got UConn, Syracuse, right? Boston College. Outside of that, right, what big time school, right, are these guys really, you know what I mean? Do you think that benefits those more CAA schools and schools of your size?
I definitely think it does, especially with the lower levels, to be able to the quality of football in New England at the high school level and at the prep school level, because there's a ton of prep schools up here in New England. I think that's improving as well. And there's just not enough landing spots for kids that want to stay close to home. So, I think it benefits a lot of those schools. Like if you can't get into Harvard, but you want to stay nearby, you're going to go to a NESCAC,
Right.
And so then their talent's going to improve as well. We always make sure we win our state first and foremost, and then obviously let's go out and let's try and get more, really good players from New England. One thing we've seen too is with some of these Power 5 kids that want to transfer to URI, part of it is, they did their 4 years somewhere else. They want to be closer to home.
Yeah.
So their family can watch them for their grad year, for their 5th year, their senior year, whatever it is. They're like, hey, I played on the West Coast, or I played down south and my parents never came to a game, and I want to make sure that I go to a school where they can come to every game. It's like, great, so I think that's the thing is one, the overall high school and prep school talent is improving, and there's just not enough landing spots for them, so everyone is benefiting from that in New England. All your non-New England fans are like, oh man, that's all they're going to talk about today.
No. You're talking to a guy who went to UConn, and then you're talking to someone who started at Sacred Heart and then finished at Montclair State. So we push, the Northeast is always something we talk about because geography matters when it comes to college football, right? 100%. And the Division IIIs of the world and Division II programs, a lot of them are here in the Northeast, right? And it's just how it works. So, you go to Florida, it's all Division I. There's no Division II, there's no Division III. Like that doesn't, down south, those things aren't factors into it, right? So people don't know the level of talent that are at the D3 level, right? A lot of those guys, whether they want to stay home, whether they were just a little undersized or whatever it be, the level of football in these areas are, it's high level football.
We played, there was one year when I was at Springfield, we played Ali Marpet, who was at Hobart, and he ended up getting drafted by Tampa Bay, and he was a left guard for Tampa Bay. We protected Brady for like those 2 years that Brady was there.
I mean, hell, coach, running back from Springfield is now the head coach at UMass. So, what are we talking about?
That's the other thing too, is if they don't end up, I think like the past 6 or 7 Super Bowls, there's been a Springfield coach on the staff somewhere. That's a thing too, is like the opportunities you get. People say, "Oh, why would you go play D3 football? Why would you want to do that?" There are so many benefits from obviously playing a sport, but then the network and the connecting and being a part
100%
bigger than yourself.
And especially if you already know, like, exercise science is what I want to do, or physical education is what I want to do. Like, that's where you go. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was in my top 3 when I was coming out because that's what I wanted to do, and I ultimately just made a different decision. But, I mean, a huge appeal to go to that program itself. And like you said, the network, the production, across the board for what those guys do. I mean, you put Springfield grad on any resume and you're in the door, right? So that's kind of how it works.
There's no doubt about it. What now? It's you taking over a strength conditioning coach, and some of the things that you've been working on. What are the things that you've seen that have directly benefited your teams that you may be doing that maybe guys didn't do a few years ago, stuff like that?
Yeah, so I do help a lot of high school programs out there as well. One thing that I'm always trying to do is give back to the high school football coach that's out there that has to be in charge of the weight room or has to be in charge of the strength conditioning program, and they didn't go to school for it, right? They don't have the background that I have, but they want to do a good job. They want to train the kids, and they know that maybe some of the old school ways of doing things aren't how we should be doing things. They know maybe we shouldn't do 10 300-yard gassers. Maybe we should be doing something better. And there's still some coaches out there doing that. But, there's a lot of coaches that know, hey, we got to do things a little differently. So I try to put as much information out there to help coaches. And, 2 areas that I think are important that I've done a lot of. One is contact prep. And contact prep is the idea of like pushing, pulling, overhooks, underhooks, just getting physical, because kids don't roughhouse anymore, right? They don't have gym, they don't have recess where they can go out and just like play 2-hand touch and roughhouse. And then when you're in the off season or when you're in the summer, you're not doing those things. You might be doing 7-on-7 on air, but that's not the same as pushing a body, moving a body, learning about leverage, things like that, especially for our big guys. So contact prep is something that I started doing even pre-COVID. And then when COVID hit, everyone had to spread out, so we weren't allowed to do contact prep. So as soon as we could start doing it, it is a skill, right? Is learning how to be body to body, learning how to be up close in someone's face and move a body, because that's different than a sled. A sled is just going to slide. A body is going to fight back, right?
Right,
so
right.
That stuff. If I'm a defender, if I'm a defensive player, learning how to clamp and wrap and hold a clamp so you don't just arm tackle people. If you learn how to set edges, right, and hold your posture, how do you lever into that without getting just folded? All those things are something that you can work on in the off season. You can work on that as part of your strength conditioning program. And honestly, we do a lot of that for our big guys for conditioning, because they don't need to run, they need to move people, and that'll cook them. So that's one of my big things that I focus on and try and get education out there on. The other one is changing up your agility drills, right? So you have your cone drills, you have your 5-10-5s, you have your, some of your, if you do mat drills and you have your different stations and things like that, people do like the move the mountains. And in my opinion, I don't think enough of those things get you ready to actually play football. So we do a lot of drills that are, 1v1 in the box, and then the ball carrier is going to run this way and you got to try and tag him. The ball carrier is going to try and make you miss and score. Things like that. We call it scores and stops. So drills where the offensive player is trying to score, and then drills where the defender is trying to stop them. And we try and give our kids as many of those as we can in the winter workouts and in the summer workouts, so that by the time you go to preseason or by the time you go to spring ball, you've gotten kind of some reps under your belt. Your offensive players are tuned up a little bit. They've been working on some skills, or they're trying like a new jump cut. You can work on it in the off season instead of at practice where you can't afford to make a mistake. For our defenders, they tell me all the time that they appreciate these drills because tracking somebody and understanding your leverage, and we do a lot of like 2v1 drills as well. So practicing how to get into a good vice. How do you work together?
It's huge.
Those things. Those are things you can. I'm not a football coach, right? But I can set up a speed and agility drill that feels a little bit like football and get them running around and getting the conditioning piece or getting the agility piece that I want done. And there's a way to fit that into your off season and in your summer programs. And that's going to be better than doing a bunch of 5-10-5s or cone drills. So those are my two big things: contact prep and better agility drills.
What are some of the things that you think are directly contributing to their overall athleticism? Those are drills, obviously, they're working some like on the field work. They develop, some of their quickness to the ball and spacing and all that kind of stuff. What do you think they're working on that are working on to develop their overall athleticism?
So it's an all-encompassing program. We put all these things in, and I think the big thing is not to let any one thing kind of overshadow everything else. Like if we do heavy squats to the point where you can't go out and run the next day, or you can't go out and condition the next day because you're smoked, then that didn't make us better. I'd rather get 5 days in where we get 5 good days than one really hard, crazy day that you then need to take a day off from the next day because you can't recover from. The biggest thing is, can you come back every single day and do a little bit more? With our lifting stuff and our weight room stuff, we put a ton of effort on speed work and sprint training. I mean, we run every day. So Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays are more speed focused. We get plenty of rest. We'll get the sleds out for like accelerations. We'll get, we have lasers for timing sprints. I think timing sprints is a great
huge, right? Huge.
And the kids compete. It's a big deal. Is competition is in everything that we do, not just games and not just drills, but you got to compete against yourself when you come in the weight room. Friday is a change of direction day for us. And then Tuesday, Thursday, it's, we'll do upper body, but we'll do conditioning after. So we get our kids, we put the cleats on 5 days a week, because when you go to preseason, you're going to have the cleats on every day. You're going to run every day. You need to be okay with doing that. And you can't be, you can't squat so hard that you have to take the next day off. It's just not conductive to a good practice or a good development. The other thing we do too is we look at every guy based on their position. I've been doing this long enough now that I know, for a wide receiver at the FCS level, what is a really good squat? What is, based on guys that we've sent to the league or guys that we've sent up a level, guys that have had really good pro days, they all have about this squat. And we kind of look at their body weight as well. So, a 210 receiver for us is different than a 185 receiver. Does that make sense? Like,
yeah, 100%.
Those guys shouldn't both have a 500-pound squat.
No, not at all.
If they do, the 185 guy's a freak, So it's
right.
Like once they have a good enough number, so we do that for bench, squat, we have vertical jump numbers, we have sprint numbers, we have body fat percentages that I know if you want to go to the next level, you need to have the body fat at this. This is an elite body fat. This is a good one. This is an average body fat. This is a bad body fat. So I tell these kids all the numbers and I show it to them, and we use, a light system. So, Rhode blue is the best. And then there's green, yellow, and red. And I'm like, okay, you've got 1 blue, 2 greens, and 3 yellows. So what do you think you need to work on in your program? You need to bring those yellows up, because if you're a guy who's all blues and greens, you're going to go to whatever the next level is, whether it's out of here or it's up to the NFL. So, and I can show them, I'll say, hey, here's the results from the NFL Combine. Here's how you'd stack up, because I can look at your numbers and show you. So we take a look at those things. And then once you're a good squatter, is there a difference between being a 500-pound squatter and a 510-pound squatter? Not really. But is there a difference between being a 35-inch vertical and a 38 or a 39-inch vertical? Yes, there's a big difference there. So it's like, let's push those things. Once you get good at certain categories, let's go push the ones we need to push on. And then once you're good at, and I haven't had this very often, but once you're good at pretty much every category, then it's about staying healthy and being that dude every single day. Right. So anybody can show up on testing day and do a great job testing.
Absolutely.
You've seen those kids that go to the combine and you're like, oh, I've never heard of this guy, but he's a combine freak. I want freaks that can walk around every day at the top scores. So it's getting those guys healthy enough that they can show up every day and do that, which is the tricky part. So I know some programs are all about, we got to keep lifting it, keep lifting. Once you've got that set in my program, don't get me wrong. Like there are times a year where we'll still squat heavy and bench heavy, but once you got those, what is going to take you to the next level? And we make sure that your program has the things in it to take you to that level. And now that might be different for my grad transfer, 5th year senior from a Power 5.
Did we lose Coach?
Might have, I think. I don't know.
Maybe. I understand what he's saying, right? You kind of.
Oh, there you go.
There we go. We lost you for a little bit, Coach.
I'm back.
You're back.
All right,
I was giving away too many secrets. They were trying to.
That's it.
Yeah, you have to go back into that, I think, again.
So we make sure every guy has a program for them because, a 5th year transfer from a Power 5 needs something different than the 18-year-old who's just getting started.
Or the 18-year-old that's coming from a high school program that has never really lifted before because he's always been in he's been a 3-sport guy and he got, 3 weeks in the summer and that's it. Or he just doesn't know. Maybe he's coming from one of those, quote, old school coaches that, hey, we're doing this and just killed them every day. Or maybe he doesn't even know how to squat at all, right? And now you kind of got to reprogram that guy when you get him in the building to kind of set that, going forward.
And to be honest, it's one of the things, again, it's a recruiting tool for us, is I'm going to treat you like you. I'm not going to give the entire team one program and say, we're all doing this.
Right.
Because positionally, that doesn't make sense. And then just experience and age-wise, injuries-wise, things like that, like it does not make sense. So I can't do that. Now at the high school level, if you're the one-man show, you're doing it by yourself, that's when you got to say, okay, one program, we're here, and then I'm gonna on my notepad, I'm gonna write something a little different for Johnny, and then Joey's gonna get this, and you just got to make it happen. So I've been there. I've been kind of the one-man show once in a while, and it is what it is, but.
Right. You do the best with what you have. It's hard because it's cookie cutter, right? You got to just go, what can I hit on that it's going to benefit majority of these guys? And then maybe if I see one of these kids that might have the opportunity to do something else, maybe we could tweak this or, maybe you do it somewhat positionally or maybe by grade, right?
At the very least, I would do it by grade. I'd say, hey, freshmen and sophomores, you're not doing back squat, you're doing goblet squat. Maybe sophomores and juniors that are ready for it. You guys are going to front squat. And then, I got a couple seniors in the back. They're going to back squat. That way everyone's still squatting. So they're all kind of in the same area, but you're watching them. They're doing different things. And then, a lot of the pull-ups, push-ups, rows, lunges, all that stuff can be the same. Those guys can do all that stuff together. It's just some of those meat and potato things. I might tweak them a little bit at the high school level by grade. And they're ready for it,
That makes a ton of sense. What do you have like an overall philosophy that you adopt for your program? So they're, for example, like TCU, right, with their football program, like their whole thing is purely about speed and explosion. Like if they can have their athletes at a certain level of speed and explosion, then they feel like they have a chance, because maybe they don't get the same guys that Texas does. Obviously, they still get great players, but maybe not the level that Texas. So that focus on that area seems to be. Is there like a philosophy for what you're doing, or is it really kind of customizable to each individual athlete? Well, what are you kind of doing from a program standpoint there?
So it's the total approach, right?
Okay.
And I guess it depends on the time of the year, right? So the off season is a time where, I like to think that I'm a DJ out here kind of spinning the dials.
Oh, all right. That's a great way to put it.
Yeah. We'll spin the strength dial up a little bit and, we're going to worry about speed. Sure. but I'm also in New England and I don't have a bubble yet. So
right.
some of the running stuff we can do. And that's
I was going to ask you about that, though, Coach. I was going to ask you about that, especially when we were talking about the New England football thing. Like, people don't understand, like, a lot of these states don't have spring football, right? So you're indoors for a certain amount of time. Space becomes a factor. Like, we get real creative with how we sprint around here. I'll tell you that much. There's a lot of sprinting going up and down high school hallways in the Northeast, dude. Like, shit, it's like, whatever it is. We get a 45-degree day here. We're like, dude, can we get outside? Is there enough clear pavement that we can sprint or do something? Like, you got to get creative. I get it.
We had too many days that were like below 20 degrees. And I'm like, could we go out, could put some light? We could, but I'm like, if it was a hammy, I'm going to feel terrible for it. So there was a day where it was like 32 and the kids were fired up. They're like, let's go. Cause they're like, they got to at least go outside.
Itching to get outside, man. I mean, those 5 a.m. workouts in Fairfield, Connecticut at St. Croix were like, oh, what are we doing? But like, let's get outside and go.
I mean, I'm thankful we have an indoor track that's got like 3 or 4 basketball courts in the middle. So we can do a lot of our speed work still. We bring our sleds and we can do our kind of sled sprints, but everything's a short distance. So again, the DJ dial, I don't worry about the top speed so much in the off season. Now we get into spring ball. It's about staying healthy. I mean, we're still going to try and push the strength a little bit because it's different than in season. I get a couple extra days to train them. We can still kind of go. And then in the summer, the first half of the summer is, let's do a little bit of everything, speed, power, and let's try and maybe one last touch of strength work. And then second half is about really making sure that they're in shape first. So conditioning gets really cranked up the second half of the summer. We're still doing a lot of strength work because I know once we hit preseason and then the start of in-season, it kind of fades a little bit, and then you can start picking it back up once you get back into an in-season routine. But, I know August camp is not the time of year where they want to lift some heavy weights. So we got to make sure that we're doing as much as we can before we kind of turn that dial down in the month of August. But our conditioning has to be up so that we can be ready for it. So there's no overall one thing. It's making sure that these kids can practice every day, because the kids that practice every day are the kids that are going to play, and then making sure that when it is game day, we're ready to go. And it's an all-encompassing thing. So you can't just focus on one category, because once you start doing that, you miss all the other things that make you a great football player.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. You guys have an indoor track facility there, though, right? In Rhode Island. So I remember we represented when I was an NFL agent for 6 years. We represented a couple of URI kids. One that was Andrew Bose, a linebacker. He was like 2014, I think, maybe he was 15. But I remember he was doing his workouts in the indoor facility there. What is your kind of thought process? Have you heard of sprint-based football at all?
Oh yeah, my buddy Tony.
Tony, so we've had Tony on. And I'm sure Derek was waiting for the question to come, right? Because we've had Tony and
we've had Tony, every one of his disciples. I mean, dude, we're like hitting them all. We've been hitting them all,
And what we like about it is everybody has kind of they're all in the same kind of community, but they have all slightly different approaches to how they handle everything. But I, as a former track coach and guy who ran track too, I love to see that coming to the forefront, because the game of football is basically continuous short sprints the whole entire time, right? Like whether you're running, blocking, tackling, you're sprinting to a place, and which makes it, I think, unique in any other sport, in the sense that in basketball, you're sprinting, but a lot of times you're sprinting with a ball too in your hand, or you're moving with a ball. There's times when you're moving without it. But a football, almost all the players, other than the guy who has the ball on a play, they're all sprinting, and none of them have a ball, right? So even linemen, right, they're running off the ball. They have their way of doing it, but they're all running off the ball. So it's unique, and it's interesting to see how and me and Derek talked about this. Like what Tony is kind of putting on paper is things that like some people do things a little bit differently, but like guys who are football and track coaches like I was, and always kind of focused in that area. But he's taking it to another level, like how as you know, where the focus on the recovery, focus on the resting, focus on being able to, like what you're doing. If you can train them, be able to sprint each day in some capacity by not overloading them and those kind of things, you really get like these long-term gains, right? So what kind of things, since you're familiar with Tony, what kind of things do you think that you're applying now in that area that you're seeing, like, are you seeing results in? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think that the three big things that people get from Tony, and maybe sometimes they don't get it, and that's why they're like, I don't believe in that. Like that, you can't just sprint and go home. One, competing, right? He talks about all the time. If you don't record it, if you don't put it on blast, you're not competing. So like when we do our lasers and stuff like that, we post it in the locker room the next workout so they can see where they stack up on the team.
And they want to see it.
When I put their numbers up and say, all right, pound for pound squats and all that, I put it in the locker room again so they can see it. I'm not hiding anything, and I'm not lying to them, and I'm not lying to NFL scouts when they come visit. Numbers are numbers, and if you don't like your numbers, change your numbers. Like, right. I don't know what to tell you. So competition is one. Two is having fun, which is something that, like, it's sad, but a lot of coaches don't know how to do that. They don't know how to make practice fun.
Nope.
Or they get caught up in, and I hate this, they get caught up in the mental toughness stuff. They get caught up in the, when I played, it was a grind. It was, they beat us down, and you need to learn that because life is hard. And it's like, there's a balance there. You can make things challenging and it can still be fun. I
think that's a great point right there. That's a really
huge,
undervalued point, that you could make practice hard and fun at the same time. Get what you need to get out of it and make it fun.
We still have standards and expectations.
Of 100%.
You show up in the right outfit. You act a certain way. And if you do those things wrong, there's consequences to those. But if you fall in line and doing it right, it's a good time. We have a blast. If you watch any of my videos, we're having fun. But we're working our butts off too. So it's like, do I need to – the definition of grind is to turn them in the dust. Why would you want to take your athletes and don't you want to build them up?
Yep.
The whole, we're going to grind them out. It's like, then what are you going to be left with when the season starts? You're going to have
pieces, right?
So that's number two. And then number three is where was I trying to go with it? Is the sprint stuff, which I think is important. But part of me is I get the minimal thing, I get the rest thing. The hardest part is, as a football coach, there are a lot of things you need to get done in a week, right?
100%.
You want to see, you want to rep certain things out, you want to practice these certain things. Now, sometimes as a coach, that's going to force you to simplify, which I think too many coaches are trying to do too much, especially at the high school level. Do too much.
Preach.
They're trying to add a new formation in offensively every week. It's like, nope, like stick to your guns, get really good at them. And once you can start doing it, then you can start scaling practice back a little bit. But, at my level, there's so much that needs to get done, so much they need to game plan for, especially at the college level. There's so many things you're going to see now compared to maybe high school. These kids are better. They can do more things. They can get into more fronts and packages and things like that. Right. So you got to be prepared for it.
And you have those time restraints too that you're kind of factoring into as well. You know what I mean? Like, we can only meet with our guys, at a certain time for a certain amount of time. We can only do this much contact. So we have to kind of put this into this window. It's a lot to kind of just figure out a schedule itself that works.
So if I only do a couple sprints here and there, and I don't believe in conditioning them, and I don't, conditioning is just going to make them slow and tired. If I don't do any conditioning, they're going to have a really hard time when preseason football starts. We're going to go from minimal dose to, hey, we're out there for 3 hours a day, 4 days in a row, the first 4 days in August. Like, it is what it is. So if I don't get them running and outside and being able to handle that without, being exhausted, without their knees killing them, without their feet hurting from being in the cleats on the hot turf, like, there's a workload that needs to be established. And sometimes I think that gets lost in the sauce. So that's why coaches don't even want to listen to Tony. They're like, well,
right,
we're going to practice for 3 hours on the first day. So if we don't do conditioning. Now, I do a ton of, repeat sprint ability. We'll do a short sprint, 5 seconds long. We'll get a 25-second rest, 30-second rest, and we'll do 40 of those.
Right.
And we're going to build our conditioning that way. We'll take some of those agility drills that I'm talking about. You'll do one hard rep, get back in line, and then 30 seconds later or a minute later, you're back up to do another rep. So we're going to build our conditioning by short interval-based sprints, more so than some of the old school long 300-yard shuttles and things like that. Now, we might do some 100-yard striders and things like that to open the kids up a little bit, work the a little bit more of an aerobic system benefit. But as a whole, I'm still conditioning. I love Tony. I love sprint-based football. I love a lot of the ideas from it. But I got to get these kids ready for the reality of the situation, which is they're going to do a lot of running in August. I don't want it to be a shock to the system when they start doing that.
Well, it's interesting because he talks a lot about that is more of a that shock is more of a stressor-based thing than
that's a huge piece to it too.
Yeah,
you're back in front of your coaches for the first time all summer. You're trying to impress them. You're trying to learn a playbook, or you're trying to remember a playbook if you're an upperclassman. Coaches might be putting new things in. And I think people underestimate, especially at the college level, like how stressful preseason football is. Like you're there.
Yeah, people don't understand what a training camp is, man. Like they don't get it.
And I've talked to a couple coaches out there, a couple head football coaches that are sprint-based guys. And one of them, he's a D3 guy. He likes to be private, so I'm not going to let him go. But, he's a playoff. Every year they're in the playoffs. And he never practices for more than 90 minutes. He takes every, third day off. And I'm like, what do you mean off? Like, you're still doing film? He goes, no, I don't even want to see him. He goes, they can go in to get treatment and get in the ice bath. And then, we'll pick it up with meetings the next day. I'm like, he's an off day. He's like, it's an off day. It's got to be mentally off. And that's part of the problem is we don't give the kids a chance to turn it off, because an off day for us is still, hey, we got to watch film. We got to get in. We got to, we got to walk through this or do that. And it's a challenge. So that's one thing that Tony does a good job of, is when it's let them rest, get away, and they'll come back better the next day. It's hard to believe that. And you're like, oh man, I only have so many hours. I need them to watch film. I need them to do. I promise you, you let them get away, you'll feel so much better. Maybe if coaches did that, they would feel better too.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's yeah, probably would.
100%.
They're probably coaching at 60% most of the time.
The problem for coaches is they go home and then you got a wife, you got kids, so you don't get to turn it off like a college kid or a high school kid.
Right, that's why they just stay at the office.
Just go on your office.
Yeah, that's why they'll just rather sleep on the cot in the office. You're right. Like 100%.
Until their wife and kids divorce them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Then they don't have to worry about that anymore. But it's interesting because hearing the different kind of thought processes on those things, and I also wonder. Now, do you work with are you personally doing? I mean, you're in charge of the whole thing, so I'm sure they have you doing football as being in charge of the whole thing. Are you also working with some of the other sports, or do you have other guys that are handling that for you?
Yeah, so I have we have a men's basketball position, which is men's basketball and men's soccer. So he's got his thing. We have a women's basketball position. So those two travel with men's and women's basketball, and then I travel with football. And
right.
I have two more assistants. So they split up the rest of the teams. My other team is women's tennis. So I train football and I train the women's.
Oh, that's interesting.
That's a hell of a that's a hell of a flip, the switch going from
but
I'm
telling
numbers.
you, my women's tennis team is tougher than some of these football guys. I'll tell you that.
I believe it,
Coach. I don't doubt that for 1 minute.
Gamers.
With them, when he works a lot of change of direction and forward and back, right?
Yeah, I mean, again, same thing. Like when we have time to turn it up, like we'll do some heavy strength work and whatnot, but a ton of movement, a ton of conditioning, and a ton of change of direction stuff for them.
Yeah, I figured that, yeah.
Especially because it's a tag. Like if you ever played it or you ever watched it, I mean, they're out there for hours. If it's a long match, they might be out there for over an hour grinding it out. So you got to be incredibly fit. You got to be in great shape, and then you're going to do that. You're gonna play a game or a match. You're gonna do 4 of those in a 3-day weekend. So it's not like, baseball, we play 4 games in a weekend. Okay, you sat in the dugout for like 90% of it.
Right.
Tennis, you're on the court doing it. So
their biggest issue is
tough.
like their biggest issue with baseball and softball is you are sitting in the dugout or you're standing in the outfield for a long time, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, you're expected to burst.
Yeah.
So it's like, how do you prepare yourself when you're basically unprepared? Like each time, you have to almost do like a little mini preparation.
Yeah, just stay loose, gotta stay ready.
So because you got all of a sudden explode out of nowhere. You hit the ball, and you got to take 2. You got to run 2 bases, and even though it's only maybe 1 or 2 times a game, but it's crazy because I remember when the Yankees strengthening. You remember this, Derek? When the Yankees strength and conditioning coach several years ago, he was fired because guys were popping hammies all over the place. So whatever he was doing was not putting them in a good position when they had to all of a sudden explode out of nowhere, and they were popping hamstrings. I have no idea.
You know what is Tony's stuff is making an impact at that level too, is because they weren't doing any hard sprinting. They were running poles and they're jogging the outfield and whatnot. And that doesn't get you ready for pop, fly. Like you got a full speed sprint. So I see a lot of that. Like I see Shohei Ohtani doing these sprints and things like that.
Dave, when we had Miami's the University of Miami's baseball coach. He came on and he was like
baseball strength coach. Yeah.
He's like, I'm a football guy. Like my guys, if you walked into our baseball facility, you'd be like, what the hell these are baseball guys trading? He goes, everything, like it does not look like baseball trading, right? He's like, we're talking explosiveness. We're talking, maximum velocity stuff that we're, kind of doing all this stuff, explosiveness, whatever. And, he had Machado. And he talked about like this guy was good before I got him, but when we started doing some of these things, he just exploded and became the guy that everybody knows him as now. So, a lot of that stuff, it's all across the board. It just needs to be a certain type of way. And I think the one thing too with Tony, a lot of people are seeing that, the health factor comes into it, right? Like football teams are finishing their season with the guys they started with. There's not too many guys on the sideline wearing varsity coats for games because they're injured, right? Guys are continuing, and football, we know, I mean, if you're not getting hurt, something's like almost wrong, right? Like that's just kind of the nature of the beast in a way, right? So to be so preventative in what they're doing, I think a lot of guys are buying into it because of that.
And I started out here as a baseball guy when I was the assistant, and that's kind of what they brought me in for. And I'm glad to see it kind of shift a little bit, getting away from just doing the bands and doing all that. Don't get me wrong, there's times and places.
Yeah, right.
Of course.
But we've gotten back to kind of banging some weights a little bit and being dudes. And you know what? Like, I miss the steroid era because those guys were looking great. And, at least we're looking more like big old athletes and horses. And I can mix some of our baseball guys into a football lift, and you wouldn't be able to tell me who's on the baseball team and who's not.
Right?
Our guys love to get after it, and I think it pays. It pays dividends.
Well, I think that's a huge part. And I think that's something that's really, really on the baseball side of it. I've watched a couple of podcasts where they were talking about guys were talking about how.
Then it grinds my gears watching all these high school kids do summer ball and 7-on-7 camps all summer and do everything possible except lift weights and strength training.
Well,
and go
that was that's what he talked about. So this was a guy who he was talking. I can't remember which college coach or baseball coach was, but basically he said they go to these showcases. They're looking for powerful, fast, big. So like it, and it's not because of what you would think. It's because when baseball, especially down south, they're probably playing 80 games in the season, right? In the Northeast, maybe they're playing 45, 50.
Yeah.
That's a long season regardless, whether you're in the Northeast or you're in the South. That's a lot of games in baseball. And what they think that a lot of obviously the youth baseball players and high school baseball players that do travel stuff or whatever, what they're missing out on is that they're recruiting these guys that they need to be able to play for a duration. And they found that the faster they are, the bigger they are, the faster they are, more athletic they are, the more opportunity they had to be successful. and now even pitchers obviously similar thing, but that's what they were looking at. So their times in like the 60 has become more and more of a bigger thing. Like their time from one base to the other has become more and more of a thing than it ever was, which I thought was really interesting because, like you said, baseball used to, they've jogged pole to pole, you know what I mean? Like those kind of things. And now those guys have realized that those guys aren't they brought in players that can't make it because they're not strong enough and fast enough to endure the season. So
right.
it applies.
It's a lot. It's a long ass season, dude. You know what I mean? It's like
I tell every high school kid, whether they're a baseball player, football player, does not matter the sport. If you're in high school, all I need is 3 days a week. 3 days a week for a year is over 150 workouts. You do that for 4 years of high school. That's over 600 workouts you put in before you ever even go to college. The person that starts versus the person that has 600 workouts under their belt are two completely different human beings. You can change your life by just training 3 days a week, 52 weeks a year for 4 years. But they don't believe you. They don't believe it. So they don't do it.
Well, they don't, because the skill thing, guys have convinced them that, your skill at hitting or fielding
is more
and throwing is so much more important, but they don't realize that, and this is my opinion, because I am by no means a baseball expert. I'm just an observationist from that standpoint, and from what I've seen and listened to. And you look at the pros who are successful, right? What I've seen is that, like, kids, as they start to hit puberty, skills start to even out. And now, yes, I mean, if they're, there might be 1 in a million kids, or 1 in 1,000 kids who they are supremely skilled because they've done it all and they picked it up early and they're so supremely skilled that they make up. But that is not the majority of kids that play 9,000 games. Like they're not getting exponentially better at their skill. That's the mistake I think that a lot of skill coaches make. It's almost like with strength, right? You get to a certain point in strength development, right? You got to get to this minimum point, and then there's you're getting incremental gains, right? Well, same thing from a skill standpoint, but they're doubling down trying to get incremental gains, which really is not making the impact. Whereas they're not getting to the minimum strength point where they might be able to then make more gains in their skill. You know what I mean? So they're sacrificing that, they're reaching a cap, which I think is really interesting. And a lot of, I'm sure baseball guys who teach the things would used to probably argue against that, but now we're seeing it. It was no different than, basketball, right? Before they started weightlifting, like, Michael Jordan famously talks about how he was lifting.
Oh, dude.
We talk about
when he got his ass kicked by the Pistons, right? And when he was younger, and then he literally got bullied throughout the entire playoffs, and he made that switch like next season. Like, dude, I got to hit the weights. He became the Michael Jordan that is Michael Jordan.
We talk about it with our football guys that the kid at our level, right? There's not many people the scouts come looking for. They come down, find the best guys. The number one question they ask is this kid a professional? Or does he need to learn how to become a professional? And what we tell our kids, what we mean by that is, are you the guy that shows up every day prior to workouts or prior to practice, and you get on the foam roller and you stretch and you go to the training room and you get your nicks and bumps taken care of, or do we have to, call your phone and ask you where you are? Why aren't you getting this treatment right now?
Yeah.
Are you the type of person that always has their water bottle with them and it's full? Or are you the person that you forget your water bottle everywhere you go and you're dehydrated? Are you the person that is eating food because it's important to stay fueled up or not? And, are you the guy, you don't have to love lifting weights. I'm okay with that. But are you the guy that shows up every day and does everything that we ask you to do when it is time to lift weights?
Right.
That's what being a professional is, because when you go to the next level, all of those things are things you now have to do. You have to do them or you will be fired from the organization. And if you are an FCS kid, if you're a 1AA kid, you don't get granted the same opportunity that the big time kid from Alabama or Texas gets, because let's be honest, you don't have as much raw athletic ability as they do. So you need to do everything right and be a professional, because if they have to babysit you, you're getting fired because they have enough kids that they have to babysit at that level. So we tell our kids all the time, are you being a professional right now? Are you doing things that would make you, if that's what you want to be, and even for us, if you want to play here, the guys that play here are the guys that have bought in and do everything right. They know that they need to come in and stretch. They know that they need to eat food right after practice. They know that they should come in and watch film with their coach in the afternoon if they don't understand something or if they have questions. And the young guys, some of them that have been to a really good prep program or a really good have some of those skills already, which is awesome.
Correct. Yes, more and absolutely.
More kids come in and they have a better idea how to be a pro. But you still have a ton of young kids that come in that have never had that guidance, have never had that structure, never had some of the resources that they have now, and they don't know how to take advantage of it. So it's my job to educate them, and it's the job of our upperclassmen to say, coach talks about being a professional all the time. That means you need to do this, this, and this. That means you're coming in with me tomorrow, and we're going to stretch together. I'm going to show you how to stretch. So we talk
on our off day or whatever it is. You know what I mean? Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
Today, this is the first day for spring break for us. So, I mean, granted, a lot of kids go home and whatnot. But, I can look outside my window, and there were 12 to 15 kids that didn't go home. But they're here, and they're doing the right things. And I don't have to be out there with babysitting. I can look, and they're doing the right thing. That's, again, being a professional. And that's something that we're starting to see more of it, but that's something that kids can always get better at.
No doubt about it. Awesome. Couldn't have been said any better. Coach, Derek, any last thoughts for you?
Coach, I really appreciate you taking the time, man. Like I said, it's always great to get guys on here, from a multitude of levels. And we kind of touch on a lot of things on this podcast, from every aspect of every sport we could possibly hit on. We like to keep it, we like to do that so everybody kind of gets, but when we can really dial it in to kind of, I don't think people really understand like FCS strength training coaching roles or what those guys are doing specifically, right? Everybody just kind of wants to look at, either a big program and they don't even know what that entails, right? So to get a guy like yourself who kind of can explain things and kind of put things down for our viewers and whatnot and educate on top of it with it, Coach, I really appreciate you taking the time, man.
This is a blast.
Thanks, Coach. We look forward to maybe having you on again in the future, and we'll see you real soon.
Yeah, give me a call anytime.
I love it. Thanks, Coach. Appreciate you.
That was great. Great. We're getting started.
Dude, he's got a good thing going.
Yeah, it's so interesting how Tony's he's reached like a
every level, bro. I think one of the
fast, right?
I think one of the benefits of it though, too, dude, right, is because it's so drastically different than what anybody is used to, that it's almost like so crazy we have to pay attention to it, right? So I think on some way, shape, or form, everybody's really kind of heard about it, whether it's word of mouth or like, now to what depth anybody looks at it, because some people say, wait, what? Like, you're only doing that, like, and turn it off right away. Or whether some guys look at it and say, wait, let me really kind of take a look at this and see what goes into it. Or someone like Coach who looks at it and says, all right, some of this I can use, some of this I can align with or understand or put in place into my program, but it's not the end all be all, which is kind of where we stand a little bit. Like there is a lot of it that we really like and want to use and are going to execute and do and put into place. But also at the same time, all right, we still need to do certain things that needed to get done. And I think what Coach said about, with football, the time constraints of certain things and you have to see certain things, I think really factor into the kind of how, whether, you go all in on Tony or not, I think there's still certain things where, I don't think I can be all in on it, but I can be, definitely implement more than anybody has. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I'm curious to see how we go forward. How how it continues to evolve. Like everybody's going to use bits and pieces, definitely.
100%.
But there are certain things like I'm experimenting with certain things.
Like I would love to see a big time Power 4 program say, look, we are feeding the cats. This is how we're doing it, and then see where it goes, right? Or whatever that aspect of it. I think it'll be
TCU does it. Because when they went to the state championship and national championship and they got blown out.
Well,
yeah, no. That was. I think that was more Jimmy's and Joe's when they got the championship. But
I think that's always going to be a factor, right? We always talk about Jimmy's and Joe's. That's how it is. But if you really
that's the overwhelming factor, I think,
that kind of trumps all of that.
In evaluating, yes. In evaluating what Tony does, and the hard part of evaluating the success level of all this stuff, which is why strength and conditioning as a whole it's a science and an art. Like,
right, it's not, you can't look, it's like the whole analytics in baseball.
Well, even look, if you
analytics in general,
train 100-meter dash guys, let's just take the most extreme, top level, pure sprinting, no very little conditioning sport of all, right, is the 100-meter dash. You have to be the fastest guy in the world. You have to be obviously explosive, strong, all these things, right? And you have to be very lean body fat wise. Like all these things have to kind of come into place.
Yeah.
And it's incremental hundredths of a second, right?
You can't even put it down to what it is.
There's nothing else. I mean, there's nothing else you can compare it with, right?
Right.
So, so what I think is so interesting about it is I bet you if you got like 5 of the best sprint coaches who train all these top 10 guys in the world, I guarantee you, I could be wrong, there are 50% of the things they all do the same thing. Okay, 50% of it. And the other 50% is going to be different between guy to guy. That's my guess. Without ever just being around a lot of coaches and being around a lot of track guys, they're all going to believe in a certain amount of core elements, I think.
Right? Yep.
And then how they implement some of those elements are be different. Now, you could go and say, and this is what we talk about, the kind of part that is the hardest part to evaluate. You could go and talk to Usain Bolt's 100-meter dash coach, okay? And I've watched a lot of stuff on him. He's a very interesting guy. He's coached really a ton of top sprinters. Obviously, he's also coached the greatest sprinter of all time, right? And then you go, if you were to talk to, I don't know if Tom Tellez is still alive, but the guy who coached Carl Lewis, right, who at the time in the 80s and early 90s was the guy, right? Carl Lewis is 100% believes in the Tony Holler philosophy, right, as a coach, because he's coached at University of Houston. But the way he goes about it may be slightly different than the way that Usain Bolt in Jamaica goes about it. And Tony talked about 2 things that I think are interesting. So he talked about like how does Usain Bolt, the fact that he like kind of really lifts, like the shoulder comes across kind of, when he sprints, which looks a little bit odd, right? Does that have to do with the fact that he's more efficient? Because Tony believes it does, possibly. Right. Or does it have to do with the fact that he's genetically moving towards his body, how his body moves? He also believes that might be the case.
100%.
And then the question is, how much of that impacts how fast he goes? And then the other thing is, how much is the fact that he's just genetically predisposed to have, if he can maximize everything, because Usain Bolt is 6'5", 200 pounds with no body fat at all, basically, with training, once he got focused, because his sprint coach talks about Usain Bolt used to like to party, and he was one of the best sprinters in the world, but he was not yet the best, and he had to get him to get away from, chasing girls, having a good time. Like that was as important to him when he was really young as being a top sprinter. Once Usain Bolt got focused, and you're saying so both talked about it.
Yep.
It made the difference. So what does that mean to me? To me, that it's like, is Carl Lewis and Usain Bolt maybe among the optimal sprinters of all time, and with their body frames and such? And then if you take one of the optimal sprinter body frames,
right,
and then apply the training with their genetics, like Carl was 6'2", Usain was 6'5", but if you look at them, they have that same really
same body type. Yep, same longer, leaner type of. You know what I'm saying?
Somehow crazily explosive at even though they're tall.
Right, I wonder what Usain Bolt's vertical is.
It's got to be 40 inches.
I wonder what Carl Lewis's vertical was. Right?
Long jump 29 feet, so it's got to be 40 plus inches. It's probably 48, 47. You know what I'm saying? When they talk about some of these these volleyball players that have had these mid 40s verts, and a lot of times they're even higher than basketball players because that's all they do is jump.
Right.
Whereas that part of that might be training too, right? Take a body type, all they do is jump. And all they do is jump.
Dave, it's what you've always said to me, right? At some point, no matter how much you train, no matter what you do with it, at some point, you're going to be here, and that's kind of where you're always going to be, right? I could have trained my ass off, done everything, tried everything, all that shit. I was never going to jump 35 in a vertical, right? That's just not in the cards for me. Now I could max out whatever I can do.
There might have been some things you could have did to max out more.
For me personally.
Me too.
But at some point, everybody has that, I feel ceiling, right? Everybody's going to be, you got to reach out the most for what you got to understand that, right? You can't just look at it and be I want to run a 4.2 and then work your ass off and then be pissed off when you don't get a 4.2.
Here's the thing. I started to realize I went and did, I don't know if I told you this, but I did when I was in my mid to late 20s, I trained to do the decathlon again.
Right. Yeah. We talked about that.
Okay. And in 1 year, I went from scoring 6,000 points, I think the first time, I was at 6,500 or 6,600 within a year. Now, I realized in that short time, but first of all, I trained on my own, so I had to figure it out myself. But I did have, obviously, a track background. I was already coaching track, so I had a background in it. But what was interesting was I realized that, in a 100-meter dash, for example, I was down to 10-9 hand time. Well, you would say 10-9 hand time. It was 11-1-0. And I was 220 pounds doing it, so because I need to have some level of. So if I were to maximize, let's say I got down to 200 and was leaner, I could get to 10.7, be a 10.9 FAT guy,
right?
But not much more. Not
Correct.
much. Still very fast, but I don't know if there would be much more level.
Right, almost how much more juice can you squeeze out of who you are? Now, look, if you take now, and that's my whole point about just every level of athlete, right? Because, mainly we work with high school guys, right? Buddy, what can we get? How do we get you to be the best version of you, right? I know you want to run a 4.4. I know you want to, vertical jump this. But how do we get you to get to where you can maximize what you have, dude?
And that's what Tony talks about, which I think is interesting, is that if you think about it, so if I was in high school, I was probably an 11-1er. But let's say the training philosophies were like Tony Hollar's, and I was able to be a 10-9.
Right.
That is the difference between an FCS
100%.
and a slam dunk Division I.
Right.
So I look at Cooper DeJean, who was a 4-sport athlete, working out his whole life, really training, Adam Archuleta, right? They probably are closer to maximizing when they were in high school.
Correct.
And then college maximizing even where they're closer than most people to maximize, which allowed them to amazingly be able to be pros, right? So that's the one thing. So I think there's a level where you're capped, right? At the 100-meter level, all those guys probably have some level of elite coaches. They can't beat Usain Bolt or Noah Lyles because Noah Lyles, people are like, oh, how great was great? Noah Lyles great in high school. I think Noah Lyles holds the 100-meter dash national record for the United States in high school. So it's not like – so they took Noah Lyles, who was the best sprinter of all time in high school.
And they squeezed even more out of him.
He's an Olympic champion.
Right. Well, even like, Adam Archuleta, he just did a podcast with Tony, and he talked about, look, I was at Arizona State, and I was like, crushing numbers to begin with, but I still felt like Orch wanted more out of it. So I started working with, I forget that guy, Schroeder, maybe. Yeah. So I went with him, and he just changed, it wasn't like we changed everything. We tweaked some things. We started looking at things a little bit differently. We did some different stuff. And then it allowed me to squeeze more out of what was already really good. That I think is the difference. And I feel like a lot of like parents, high school coaches, like they look at their kid and where they're at and they say, this is where we need to get to. And we're talking about numbers that are on a whole different level. Like, I got guys that are like looking at NFL combine numbers and they're like, well, coach, we did the broad jump and I'm only this. And it's like, there's so many factors into it, man. You're a freshman in high school. You're not even done growing yet, let alone the whole strength aspect of like learning how to train, learning how to do the broad jump. Like we're talking about the elites of the elites here, dude, that are really, they've been practicing the broad jump for the last 4 years, knowing that's what they had to do at the NFL Combine. And remember, all of those things, you're working towards a drill, right? That like you're trying to get a number for, not the entire encompassing game of playing football. There's just so many factors that go into all of these things that I think people just look at a number and it's like, this is the end all be all. Not the case.
I think the key thing is that we need to look at the things that we shouldn't do. Like,
yes.
Like I'll use a good example. Like when I was in college, we had our pro day, like the NFL timing day for June, like underclassmen in college when the scouts would come, because in FCS, I don't know
what could be coming in the future.
They came to all the scholarship FCS schools, obviously all the big time Division I schools, and they would come and they would send the NFL scout would send a guy to time, and they would time you all. Well, back when I was in school, like Coach Holtz was a great football coach, obviously, but he was crazy, and that's how it was back then. And he had us. We came back from spring break, felt great, and we ran a devastating winter workouts, 2 sessions before training on, then testing on Friday after. So Monday, Wednesday, and then Friday we tested, thinking that was going to get us to run a better 40 time. Well, now by the time Friday came, I was basically limping. Now, I still was fast, so I ran a 4.66 that day.
Right, but now you look at the rest of those guys that aren't as fast as you, and like maybe their times would have been different had they not.
Everybody's would have.
To hell,
everybody would. I would have been in the 4.5s. The kid, my buddy, who was a tight end who ran. I think he only ran like high 4.6s that day or mid. But you know what? He was always smart because people who are, I call them tryhards like myself,
of course,
want to lead every sprint. Like I would lead every sprint, so I would be buried. But my buddy, who was a tight end, who did go to the NFL, he did not get as affected because he always paced himself in these workouts.
Who did?
Right. But I was one of those guys that was.
Dude, I could have never done that. Like, 1, my coaches would have never accepted it. 2, that's just not who I was. I wanted to win every sprint, every freaking. It didn't matter what the fuck we were doing. Like, dude, I'm gonna win this, right? And I used to, and not like I was just that human that.
Right.
And I wasn't the fastest. I wasn't the biggest. I wasn't the strongest. But I'll tell you what, those conditioning drills we did at the end of practice, whether it was gassers, whether it was 100-yard sprints, dude, like I was going to be in front. And if I wasn't, I was pissed. Like that was just the competitive aspect that a lot of these guys don't like. I wasn't pacing myself. I also had the whole philosophy in my head that I have to do extra and I have to go harder because I'm never leaving the field. I need to do these guys that just play offense get to go to the side after and breathe. Me, I have to go from offense to special teams to defense to special for 4 freaking quarters, dude. If I want to be at the level that I need to be, not to mention I'm never going to be as fast as some of these other guys. I'm never going to be as big as some of these other guys. I like the conditioning aspect or whatever you want to call it. I'm not going to have that be another weakness on top of it, right? So that was something I felt I could personally control. I'm not tempo and shit. Like my coach might say 50%, I'm not doing it, right? Even though it's probably for the better, they have the best intentions of it. I'm just not wired like that. I could never do that.
Absolutely.
That's why, for that's like a whole thing now. Like you're going to the youth level, right? And it's that's where you really start to find out, right? And I've been kind of on a tirade, I guess you want to say, this last week when it comes to youth coaches and what their role is in the grand scheme of things, dude. Because I've just hit my limit with it. A lot of these middle school guys or whatever, younger guys, dude, your job is to find out whether this kid loves football, right? And by doing that, like Coach just said, make it fun. That doesn't mean it doesn't have standards. Doesn't mean that you're out there just recess. No, dude, you can structure it. There's a balance, right? But you need to find out whether this kid is willing to practice 4 days in pads to play 1 game. So by the time they get to me in high school, right, I know if this is a kid that loves the game, is he just here to be a part of it? Or is he only here because you're forcing him to be here, right? That's a big piece of this thing, man. You have to really love
I
football.
think there's a way. So, and I'm learning a lot of this, but I think I'm starting to figure out that there's a way to do it and still demand of them,
right? You still have high expectations, still have high standards, right? I think
you're seeing it with my kids' friends, right? And obviously, looks again. We always have to preface it with, we're lucky enough that some of those kids are all it's a group of kids that are obviously good athletes to start with. Okay,
guys. At the end of the day, we always say this: the baseline is that, right?
Right.
You have to be at least somewhat
there's a baseline that they have.
Yeah. There's a floor here, man. You might be in the basement, but
right,
you got to be able to do some things.
Right, and it's one of those things that. Obviously, that's always first. People make a mistake of thinking it's anything other than that. But then the thing is trying to figure out.
I'll die on that sword with you, bro. That's you have to be you got to be able to walk and chew gum, dude.
When people are how do you figure out who you can get the ball to? I'm
the kid that can run.
I'm okay, I try to figure out.
First day of practice, hey guys, go run around and play tag. That literally would be a baseline. Go play tag. Yeah. The kid that stays on their feet the most, the kid that doesn't get touched, he's probably going to get the ball. Shit, guys.
So you try to figure out who can who's the right guy to deliver the ball, who's the right guy to make a play on the ball, who's the right guy defensively who just has that does I think defensively you need athleticism obviously in the defense. But
effort can help.
Effort helps on defense, right? Like a guy who's just not willing to be beat, right? And an offensive guy versus defense. There are guys that are better suited mentality-wise for either defense or offense, even if their parent wants them to play one or the other.
Of course.
But I could see it just how
just how they are.
If they're beat, right? Let's say a kid gets beat. I like to use if they get beat. If they get beat, do they fight like hell to try and get back into the play to make a play?
Or they
do. Or do they kind of half give up? Yep. And that doesn't mean that they can't be a great football player. I just think, okay, that guy's got to be more of an offensive guy because defensively you're going to get beat. And if your mindset is I'm going to give up when I get beat, you're not going to be able to play defense.
And I'll give a great reference.
Routes, but you're not going to be able to play defense.
I'll give a great example or a great reference, and I don't think that his parents would mind me talking about him. The kid we have, God, what
grade?
the hell? The younger kid, right? He's a 12U kid. Murphy, Bubba.
Oh, Bubba, yeah.
Undersized little dude, but that dude will fight like hell.
Yeah,
right?
He fight.
Like he will fight, he will chase, he will do everything, right? Like that's just his mentality. He's a kid that's like
he's a
wrestler, just a kid that's never, and he's usually the smallest one out there, but he's gonna bust and try and do all that. He'll be successful. Will he be a scholarship player? Who knows? Maybe, you know what I mean? Based off of where his ceiling is, but his effort.
And we won't know that until he hits puberty, which all these kids, people don't realize. Puberty is the great equalizer.
It has been what I have been saying to youth coaches forever, right? And we talk about it all the time, and we've referenced it here before. Everybody knows that middle school kid on whatever team you competed against that was lights out, unbelievable, incredible kid. Then you went to high school, and you're like, where the hell is this kid? Oh, he still plays. Right. He hit puberty.
And he might still be a player.
And he might still be a player, but he's not the guy. Right? That's the difference. And that's where, hey, this middle schooler's coming to my school. Is he going to be that guy, though? I think the hardest to figure out whether a guy is going to be the guy is from middle school to high school. Because is he a really good player, or did he just hit puberty before everybody else?
It's funny because I think back to and you think about yourself and what your situation. When I was a youth athlete, I was a very good youth athlete, very good. There were other kids pretty close at that time.
Right.
When I hit puberty,
then
it was like
the moon, bro.
The moon. When people were like, hitting puberty, it like. It's almost like some kids get a different level of juice acceleration. Like I was, and I worked out, so I was willing to work, which was a big thing in my household. Like I was willing to work out to become better, right? So combine that with puberty hit. I went from being a lot of kids that were pretty close athletically. I was better than most of them, but there's some kids, and all of a sudden I was like a dog, like physically, and that changed. Like I'm not kidding when I said it changed. It was these few months I was this guy, and like 6 months later I was this guy, and then went into high school. But the thing also was, not only did it happen in 8th grade, because I only got to like 5'8" in 8th grade, but it kept happening. Like I kept growing. I kept getting another inch or two, and then finally my senior year I got my last inch. I was 6'1". I went, but I was. If you look at like what I'm listed at height wise, like from I think freshman year I was listed at 5'10". Then I was listed at like my sophomore year I was listed at 6 feet. My junior listed at 6'1". My senior listed I was listed at 6'2", because they always boost you an inch.
Oh,
so I was right. So, but the thing was, like, I kept growing. Like some kids, literally, they get that juice. That's it. That's it. Like. And some guys keep growing, and there are people that grew more than me, right? So
absolutely.
But I remember that I was like, oh my God, I'm so much better than everybody. Like I was like, I remember carrying the ball. I had an injury my first game, 8th grade year. I was out for like 4 games. Like I tore my hip flexor because I was growing so quickly.
Right.
I came around the corner.
Happens a lot to kids, right? Like those injury habits, like, oh, it's on the growth plate, or wow, that kid is so uncoordinated. It's like, yeah, he's uncoordinated because his shoe size has jumped 4 sizes in 4 months. Like his jeans are now like, friggin' shorts because mom has to keep buying over and over and over.
4 weeks or 5 weeks later, came back for an injury for like the last 2 games, and then went back to like running back. Dude, I'm not kidding. I thought the kids were in slow motion. I was like, is everybody running as hard as they can? Like I would run and score, and I was, it was just because literally I hit puberty.
Which is why you now factor in this whole reclass thing, and people got to understand that the reclass it works twofold, right?
You're
physically, right? physically, but there's a social and like a mental side to it where you might be at a certain place mentally, but physically your body isn't there yet. So you have to make that decision as a parent, right? Like, what is my ultimate goal here, right? What if I now hold my kid back, but academically he's already on a different level? What is it now going to happen with school? Is he going to be bored and now all of a sudden he's not going to know how to handle that boredom per se? And now is he going to act up and then he gets labeled a problem? Like, there's a lot of factors. You have to know your kid and how they can figure all of that out. And I think one of the ways to do that is involve them in sports at different levels, right? Like, hey, this is a high level competitive sport. This is a rec sport where it's fun. You need to put them around guys that are maybe bigger, faster, stronger, or have hit puberty. How do they handle that stuff? Like social settings of different things. I think these are almost like little tests you have to put your child through in order to understand or gauge what's the best move.
It's a back and forth. I agree. It's a back and forth.
Yeah, it's a juggling thing.
Put them in a situation where they're going to be the better guy.
Put them in a situation where now maybe this is their second sport, their third sport. They're not the best player, or they're not getting coached by somebody right? Like, it's just some random where there's no bias.
How do you find out if someone's willing to? So if you put them in a situation where they're much better than everybody, that's good for confidence. Absolutely. Okay.
Right.
Then you put them in a situation where maybe they're even or someone's slightly better. Then then you can figure out, are they willing to work to try to overcome that? Like, I think you got to put them in back and forth things. And then you're right. The rec thing, dude, you just go out. Who cares if we win and lose? Okay.
Right. And also here's the other part. Can you handle that and understand, look, this is rec. Not everybody's like you. How do you handle that? Does that piss you off? Does that upset you? Are you okay with that? Like, there's a lot of these factors that at a really young age, you got to kind of figure out whether your kid can handle this.
You don't have to talk to them about any of it. You just see
Absolutely.
How they react.
They don't know any different.
Know.
Like, you're like behind the double-sided mirror.
Right. You're just seeing how they react to it, and you realize, okay, this is good for him. This is not good for him.
Right. This is a good situation. This is a toxic situation. Right.
Yeah. That's the one, like, when you argue both sides of all these things with sports, the argument for possibly all these different programs are, you can, if you're willing to do it, find the best fits for him over time, or her, and you find the best fits for them.
Absolutely.
That's the positive for having more access. The negative is if the kid doesn't have the right mentality, he just wants to quit and go to something else. So you have to figure out the right it really is about a balancing act. It's a tough balancing act. I don't know. I'm going all day about it, but let me run because I got to go to a Husky podcast the guys are waiting for me on. So
I got you. Later.